Welcome to RealAg Live, everybody. Really appreciate you joining us. We're hoping to not have some of the technical difficulties that we had yesterday. I think we got all sorted out. I apologize for that. Today is a brand new day, and today we're going to be talking about the cattle markets. It's going to be a lot of fun with a very good friend of mine. Actually, I think in the 11 years of real agriculture, I have talked to this person more than anybody else. And we've struck up a very, very good friendship, and I cherish it very much, and I'm looking forward to breaking down the cattle and beef markets today with her. If you have any questions at all today for our guest, Anne Wasko of the Gateway Livestock Exchange, you can enter those questions in the comment box, whether you're watching on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube. She is here to take on as many of those as she possibly can. And let's bring her in right now. It's Anne Wasko of the Gateway Livestock Exchange. Anne, how are you doing today? Anne, you there? Oh, it's one of those days. Hold on, I'll bring her back in here. Just give me 1 second. Hey, Anne, you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, we got Anne back. We're good. Now, I sort of jinxed it by saying we had sorted all the technical difficulties out, but I jinxed it, but we've got her back. Anne, crazy time here right now in the beef markets. We've been covering it every 2 weeks in the beef market update on RealAg Radio and on realagriculture.com. Boy, we have really seen, like we expected, that boxed beef price, that is what we call an upside down U, that chart.
Exactly. And I think, we were chatting about this earlier off the air, but the changes that happen day to day, week to week, and now we've seen in both directions on several different measurements. In this case, we're talking about the U.S. choice cutout. Surprising. At the degrees of move we've seen, but I think the bottom line is, Shaun, we don't know, and again, I think we need to be prepared for this volatility and significant changes. But this morning, the cutouts at 236 on the choice, just since last Friday,
236?
It's down another $34. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So down another 34 from when we even talked on Friday.
This has actually come down faster than you originally had sort of predicted, right? This has been a steep decline.
Yeah. And again, but go back and look at that steep incline, right? That we were all scratching our heads. Well, we understood why. It was because of the harvest challenges and lack of capacity and production that was happening, through April and early May there. And now that's both for the U.S. and Canada, largely has come back to, within 93 to 98% of, quote, last year's normal. Now we've suddenly got, like we talked about on Friday, this cutout going back to what it describes of normal when you're killing or harvesting 650,000 head of cattle.
Yeah, what I'm watching very closely is, does it snap past where we think it should likely stop and then come back to reality, or does it kind of halt around these numbers? I think it's something that none of us really know, but it is definitely very interesting to watch. And we got to put ourselves back into our former selves' shoes, maybe 6 weeks ago, and so many people talking about, hey, wait a minute, as this box beef price is racing to 470, why is the cash market not following it up? Well, thank goodness, the cash market has come back, but thank goodness it has not dropped to the same rate of decline as that box beef price. We've actually held, if you compare the two.
Yeah, markets did bounce back fairly quickly. Here in Western Canada, we only had really a couple of weeks where it was absolutely dismal, and prices have come back. But now as we get to some closer to normal harvest levels, like I mentioned, we are going to move into closer to normal pricing all the way back to our fed cattle prices. And so as a result, we're seeing lower live cattle prices. It looks like the U.S. trading, quite a few cattle today in that 104 to 107 range. Live, last week, the average in the U.S. was closer to that 113. So they're going to be off this week. Same thing in Alberta and Saskatchewan. Looks like a lot of the trade done here on that 230, 235 dress. that's going to have an average, down under 140. So that'll be off several dollars from last week as well.
And what's kind of the sentiment, as you talk to packers, you talk to feed yards, is there a kind of a bearish tone feel to that cash market? Or are we going to be able to hold here and stay above that the June futures, at 97? Are we going to be able to stay above that dollar?
Well, there's a good point right off the bat. Cattle today at 97. Convergence on Monday morning will be at middle of June. Those two are going to have to converge as we go through the next 2.5 weeks. I don't think it's all the way to 97, but I still think there's convergence, maybe some kind of middle ground between where we sit today and where that futures market is suggesting June is going to close at. But the bottom line, as we talk about these pricing, both live cattle and our cash cattle markets and our box beef market, it's looking at demand, and it's wondering what's happening as we start to see some of the economy throughout North America reopen. Of course, remember back when we first started talking about what was going on with COVID and the shutdown on the food service side, and that half of our business, previously happened in that area. And so now how is that going to look as we come back on stream? And so just lots of uncertainty. And the market trying to figure that out. We're already getting a pretty clear idea that it's not going to be like it used to be. We're only in lots of parts of our areas in Western Canada, 50% of capacity at these restaurants and fast food facilities. So we know it's not going to be how it used to be. So the market's trying to figure all this out. So when you say, where is it going to? Where is that cutout going to? It's still trying to figure itself out too.
Oh, yeah. It was fascinating to watch it on the way up, right? Because we've just never seen that before. It's a little bit harder to stomach, honestly, as we drop. If we do drop through 200, I think that I get a little bit queasy in the stomach. Okay, where are we going with this? And you got to put yourself in the shoes of a procurement manager for proteins at like a Walmart, a Superstore, a Costco. Because they're following these markets, they know what's going on, and they have enough purchasing power where, okay, you got me at 470. I was there buying at 420. I gotta lower my average cost. And we know, and
don't forget behind that when you ask about what's the sentiment like out there in the countryside, we know cattle were backed up. We were not able to get through as many as we needed to through April and early May. Now we're finally starting to see those numbers come back. But those cattle that we didn't get processed through that time frame don't go away. So that's what we call the backlog, if you will. You hear it mentioned in the U.S. and you hear it mentioned here.
Yeah.
So that's the cattle that are hanging over the market. When you say what lies ahead for the summer, we all know they're there. We all know we need to get through them. And how is the market going to handle that as we march forward?
Okay, so you mentioned the June contract for live cattle comes up the board on Monday. Is that correct?
No. I just meant the middle of the month. Sorry.
Okay.
So we're halfway through the month. They'll have 2.5 weeks to, kind of converge the two. Sense. So yeah. We've got lots of activity to happen in the next 2.5 weeks.
I was going to ask you something different in June. Okay, so we know we're almost through the month, but if you jump forward to August, we're actually at like 96.5. So it's not like we've got this carry in the market. So that's not providing a lot of support for the cash position either.
No, and so what's August looking at? August is looking like at that thing I just talked about, the backlog, right? So we know as we go forward that we need to get through the supply. We typically have our lows made in the summer market with or without COVID-19. I don't think this one will be a whole bunch different. We've still got a summer market, or what do we used to call it, the dog days of summer to get through once we get Father's Day behind us, which is right around the corner. So those are challenges we have every year. And now we've got extra challenges on top of it with heavy cattle. Carcass weights are up, 45 to 50 pounds in both the U.S. and Canada. So all those things are adding to lots of production. Nobody's worried about, at this point in time, where their next steak's going to come from.
Well, we've got October at 99, and then we get up to December, and we're at 102 and 3/4. So, December looking, I guess if you just want to compare those months to months, looking a little bit better with a little bit of carry. But you've mentioned the weight a couple times here on the carcasses, and that, I said this to Wendy White from Viterra yesterday on RealAg Radio. We're talking about the corn market, and there's just such parallels. Supply is not the question. We know we have supply of cattle, and we know we have supply of corn. The biggest question for cattle right now is, in the face of COVID-19 and the economic issues that are there, will we have enough demand domestically and on the export side to take care of all this supply? That really, really is the question of the summer. It's gone really quickly from, will we get the cattle killed? Like we've got the plants back online and they're running. They're trying to get through the backlog. We haven't fixed that problem, but we're working at it. We got a strategy. Now it's the demand piece that is such a question mark.
Yeah. And good point on the exports or the trade piece, as grain markets are looking at. Both here in Canada and the U.S., our April trade data obviously was disappointing. Lots of markets shut down, and of course some production challenges in North America. That all played into it. But the forecasts for the second half of 2020 for beef exports for the U.S., for Canada, are both to see improvements. The U.S. for the year anticipates a 5% increase in beef exports. So certainly between what they're shipping, their shipments are still solid into Japan, South Korea. China was still a strong market for them in the April data. We talked about some of our Canadian trade data last week, and that's going to be a key critical piece of that demand that we're talking about for what happens to these markets as we get past the end of June.
Yeah, we really don't know what's going on in China, do we? Like that's Japan. If we've talked about, it's kind of steady to last year, which I think is a huge success because we're competing on the same level of market access with the U.S. So I think that's a win. But China is really still the big question, and the two things: one, how much demand is there in China for beef with what's happened with COVID-19? But two, we've also got this phase one deal between the U.S. and China that maybe gives the Americans a little bit of an upper hand and leverage. I don't know. I guess we'll know better at the end of the year, but that's another question mark I have.
We'll watch. Now, I think just to clarify, the April data for U.S. into China was double what it was in March, and one of the best months they've had in recent months, about 4 million pounds. So that was a good month for them. And of course, pork exports are on fire as far as U.S. to China. So there are some bright points, and I think again, we're not exactly sure what's going on, but right now the April data was at least giving us some glimmers of hope there.
Yeah, good point. One of the things we've talked about in the phase one deals, we left the NCBA convention the first week of February was, that one of the things in that phase one deal is the fact that China's going to take a relook or a reinvestigation or however you want to put that into ractopamine. And that could be a long-term win for Canada too, even though we're not in that phase one deal. Yeah.
So that is to be further discussed, obviously, but it was also a reason for some hope too. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And one of the things I hear from a lot of cattle feeders that I talk to is and pork producers too, actually, is the fact that this whole situation with ASF that happened in China in 2019, it hasn't gone away. There is still this big opportunity. If China has the demand, there's a big hole to fill there, so to speak. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. I would agree with that, and I think if you look at U.S. pork export data to China, even for all of 2020 with COVID, it reflects that there is a need for pork in China, and that I suspect is going to continue to show its light as we go forward. So as we've mentioned on our calls and beef market updates before, ASF has not gone away, right? Yeah. And so that protein shortage, especially in those Asian countries, is still a key potentially demand piece.
As you think back on your career, do you ever remember like 2 months of volatility and this kind of price action and such a dynamic, complex web of a market? Like, have you ever experienced something like this before and trying to analyze it?
Well, Shaun, I do think we have to go back and look at BSE for Canada in terms of, another massive black swan event for the cattle industry in Canada. Granted, it was different. This is a global pandemic, and many of our trading nations are all feeling the same issues in terms of packing plant capacities and trade and food service basically shut off, and all those pieces. So I guess misery loves company. We're all in the same boat today. Back in BSE though, we were a one pony show. And it was new ground. Closing borders when you're 50% of your trade leaves your country was an absolute shock. So they're different, is I think what I'd say to you right now, Shaun, in terms of especially where I sit as a market analyst. But again, the shocks to the market at levels that from a extreme up and extreme down on cutouts. I mean, that's a new one. We haven't seen that before. But, basically taking cattle prices down. And for an extended period of time, it was felt right through the industry. I mean, cow-calf producers will talk about, what they did or didn't sell market cows for during that time frame and some of those kinds of issues. And it drug on for quite a period of time because borders were closed for quite a period of time. So
yeah.
Different, but the same.
And in both, one of the things that's similar in reaction to both of them is that really, if you're honest, how do you prepare yourself for that? Right? Like in the BSE, like I will never forget where I was on that day when they announced that, hey, that border is closed in 2003. So, we all have those memories, and it was, I think, as I talk to feeders and ranchers, and you bring up that event, those scars are still there today. Like they are not erased. People will never forget about it. And the industry has had to work extremely hard, even 20 years later, to deal with some of the ramifications of that event. And I think the same. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, and one of the critical things that I think looking back and being able to assess afterward, that was a period of time where, of course, as that drug on over years, we lost a lot of Canadian beef producers in terms of leaving the industry and selling off the cow herd. So that was a step backwards in terms of our producer base in this country. And I think we or those of us that are still around today in the business, look at it today and say, we sure don't want that to happen again, right? So how do you say that?
Absolutely. You know what? You're totally correct. In the middle of, like, right at the beginning of all the plant closures and slowdowns due to COVID-19, I heard that a lot from industry officials, is that we cannot lose another generation of cow-calf producers.
Yeah,
that
exactly.
we can't. Yeah. And that we need to figure out how we create a shield around them a little bit and give them as many tools as possible, everybody in the beef sector, to avoid that kind of situation, because we know that that's what happened in BSE.
Exactly.
And on RealAg Radio today, on Rural Radio 147, I talk about profitability. And that's one of I mentioned the BSE years and about how it was a shift away from maybe a cash cropper having a cow-calf pair, right? And I don't mean a pair, I mean pairs. And so, what will it take to add some of that diversity back into our production system? It's easier said than done to convince people that, hey, you should go out and buy 50 cows and make a go of it in the wintertime, because maybe people are looking for less winter activities than maybe my grandpa was, right?
Yeah, and just that diversification piece, like you say, is easier said than done, from whether boots on the ground piece, the mental piece around it, the labor piece. I mean, there's so many different pieces that just make that not quite as simple as what it sounds.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. So you've been to a lot of different... Oh, hey, I got a note here from James, who is watching on Facebook. Thanks a lot for watching, James. And he says, Anne is the most trusted source on livestock. Really happy to hear her look into the future. How about that?
Oh, okay. Good thing my payment worked out there. Thank you very much. Yeah. I mean, Shaun, we've been around. I'm going to include you in this conversation, but we've been around a long time. Experiences help us plan and speak to the future, but it also allows us to look back on history and tell us, okay, well, last time when this happens, this was the impact. And so I think as I've, my 30 plus some years as an analyst in the industry, now that's one of the benefits is you learn from experience. Yeah, there's certainly new ways to be looking at how we run our businesses. But again, being able to go back and lean on experience has been good for me. So thank you for that compliment.
Yeah, there you go. Thanks a lot for watching, James. Now, you've been to several brandings right now. This is and branding is the Auction Mart experience has been very, very different. I am sure in some regards the branding experience has been a little bit different. We are getting a loosening up of some of these preventative measures now across the prairies. What's kind of the sentiment as you talk to some of the ranchers at some of these brandings? How are they feeling right now about this market?
Well, first of all, I haven't been to very many for exactly the reasons you've just described. So if we're on our own operation, we ranch in Southwest Saskatchewan. We went to running several smaller ones to stay within that 10-person per branding. But now recently in Saskatchewan, that number's gone up to 30. I think the number's moved a little faster in Alberta, for example. But, just even here in the last few days where there have been some brandings that were planned after that change in number, there's lots of talk about, okay, well, price is looking pretty good. If you look at, say, Team or DLMF, our electronic sales last week, some of the forward sale prices for fall delivery on calves, actually not bad. There's some BC calves, what was the weight on them? I think they were 525 weights, trade for October delivery at 215. Well, that's as prices as strong as it was last year, but today it's June. What happens between now and October? So that's the big question. And I think, again, just that uncertainty, what lies ahead. And so often I'll talk about, well, here's what's going on in the Fed market. I'm a little bit concerned about prices as we go into July and August, and unfortunately what that sentiment and that lack of profitability might mean for the fall calf run. So I'm still, nervous or thinking that we're going to see some pressure as we head into the fall run. That's what the market's telling me.
Yeah. And we've had a few ranchers on the Farmer Rapid Fire on RealAg Radio on Thursdays, and for the most part, calving seemed to go really well. It was a pretty good spring calving season here. They're looking out across the fall, and I think there is some level of anxiousness. Another positive, though, has been the fact that it seems for the most part, and I know I'm going to say this, and somebody's going to send me a text and say, yeah, my grass conditions are not good, but for the most part, grass conditions seem pretty good.
Yeah, again, as always, it's varied across the West. I know we've received some very timely rains down here in the Southwest, which can be a very dry area.
It can be? It can be.
Okay, I'm being the optimist here, remember. So you're right. Generally speaking, it's looking better. Of course, you were talking to somebody on the corn market yesterday on this program, and certainly that it looks like we're looking at potentially a very big U.S. corn crop. And, of course, Western Canadian cattle feeders are known to import corn when the price works in their advantage. And the fall of 2020 or the winter of 2020 could easily be that case. So there's a positive in terms of feed costs for our industry. So there are some positives out there. We'd sure like to be able to talk about prices with a little bit more knowingness as we head into the fall run.
Yeah, I remember at NCBA. I remember, I believe I was talking to Don Close from Rabobank. And right. We did this interview, and I remember one of the things that Don said, crystal clear, it stuck with me. Cattle feeders have a lot of, this is even before COVID, so just remember this. He said, in 2020, cattle feeders have a lot of worries. cost of feed is not one of them. And that prediction's working out to be true. There's a lot of things that maybe haven't worked out, but that one is solid.
That comment was made back in February, and that, like you say, that one's still holding on and looks like it's got pretty good chance of being true.
And we talked about the volatility in some of the box beef market and some of the futures. The other piece of volatility we haven't really hit on here and is the Canadian dollar, and its jump around, and it's that and I think that one cannot be forgotten in all of this profitability equation, because it is such an impact on the final net profit loss at the end of the day based on how the feed yard hedges that market.
Right. And the Canadian dollar is the one piece. Of course, those of us that are maybe looking just one step beyond there and wondering about the U.S. dollar index and its impact and how the Canadian dollar reacts to that. So certainly the bias so far in the last little while has been strength. But again, we're looking at unemployment numbers, the economy, all those things that are going to play out and shed some more light in terms of where our Canadian dollar sits. But I would urge another piece to watch for as we go forward is that U.S. dollar index.
Yeah, when we were at say 71, I had interviewed numerous economists, currency analysts, and I'd asked them all the same question: what would you bet happens first, 65 or 75? And every analyst except for one took 65. And since then, we have busted to 75. I believe here in the last couple of days, we did maybe trade at the 75 level on the cash, but it in the last few days here, it's done nothing but trend backwards again. It's hard to really figure. I think it's one of those good examples. You have to have your hedging strategy in place. We're seeing oil bump all over the place. It's moved to the mid 30s. It was down significantly today as the equity market pulled back. But there's so much volatility. You really do need to have a plan in place with numbers attached to that plan, so that the daily the intra trade on the daily basis doesn't tweak your emotion and make you all of a sudden turn into more of a bear or a bull than you really should be.
Yeah, and big picture. So like we talked at the very start of the show, the markets are moving daily, hourly, like in areas we haven't seen before. So you've got to somehow step back and remove yourself from that, fraction of a moment and look at the big picture and have that plan so that you can say, here's my plan. I'm not worrying about today.
Yeah. Well, and I think, as you sort of said there, it's about with all of these variables and components of this cattle market, whether it's the live cattle, the cash, the box beef, the currency, all of these things we're talking about, we got to be careful we don't trap ourselves in confirmation bias, right? Where a 1 day lift in the live cattle future, all of a sudden we feel that the bad times are behind us and we're moving higher. We've got to really, it takes real discipline. It's easier said than done. It is an incredibly emotional time, and it's very difficult to be disciplined.
Yes, true enough.
Well, can you believe it? But it's already a half hour.
Have we talked for a half an hour? Oh, can I leave the audience with at least everybody's wondering about what our harvest levels are at. We just got the data out here in the last few moments from last week.
Yep.
Can I just throw that in?
Oh, absolutely. Go for it. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So on Friday, I talked about, previous week, the last week of May, we were able to get our harvest capacity in Canada back up over 60,000 for the first time since this whole, kind of COVID mess happened in terms of packing plant issues. And last week, so the week ending June, the first week of June, came in just a squeak under 60,000. So 2 back-to-back weeks of give or take 60,000 head of cattle for Canada. It's not quite what we would have been a year ago, which would have been in mid-60s, but, we're 93% of normal, so it's the number one question I'm asked, so I thought I'd better throw that in.
Well, and we got, but a part, that parlays very, very nicely into what we talked about earlier, is that a national kill of 60,000, now it's about moving that beef. It's about getting that beef out of those coolers, into the distribution system, into the grocery store, so that we can keep on filling those coolers, because I think that's the biggest concern right now.
Yeah, and the restaurant. So let's if you're in any part of the area where things have opened up, I'm ready to head out and check out a steak at a restaurant. I'm a good barbecuer, but yeah, I'd like somebody else to do it for a change.
I went out to a restaurant twice last week.
Ooh.
Twice.
And pretty special.
It felt also like this is what this is like. I had to remind myself. So this is kind of cool. I'm going out for lunch tomorrow for a big burger as well. So doing the best I can. Got to support everybody. So hey,
we all got to do it. Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely. Hey, Anne, this has been fantastic. Of course, you can catch Anne every 2 weeks in the Beef Market Update. We put it at realagriculture.com. Also, it is on Friday's episode every 2 weeks on RealAg Radio. Please check out RealAg Radio on Rural Radio 147 today and every weekday, 4:30 Eastern, 2:30 Mountain. Thanks, everybody. Hey, Anne, really appreciate it.
Thanks, Shaun. Good talking with you.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you very much for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Live, and we'll talk to you again next week. Tuesday show of RealAg Live, Drew Lerner. We're talking weather. Yes, that is going to be a lot of fun. Thanks a lot, everybody. Cheers.